So I see a lot of familiar faces out in the audience today, but for those of you who don't know me, my name is Simon Heaton. I'm the content marketing lead at Shopify Partners. And I've been at Shopify now for a few years, but before joining the team, I used to work as a digital strategist at an agency up in Canada. And in that role, I got exposed to a lot of different web-based and marketing projects. Today, I'm going to be joined up here by an all-star panel of Shopify experts and Plus experts to talk about how you can effectively scope your Shopify projects in your own agency. So they're going to be sharing some of their processes, some of their advice and insight that they use on a daily or weekly basis at their own firms. Now, before I invite my panelists on stage, I just want to let you all know that we'll be doing a live Q&A session at the end of today's discussion. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask any of the panelists or any individual panelist, you can actually submit some questions through the Unite app. You just have to navigate to the hamburger menu. There's a little button that says Live Q&A, and you can use the code YYZ. Submit your questions there, and we'll get through as many as we can at the end of the discussion. Now, I'd love to invite to stage our panelists and introduce them to you all. So first up, we have Ross Byler, the founder and CEO of GrowthSpark, a Shopify Plus expert agency based out of Boston that offers digital design, development, and strategy services to e-commerce brands. It's great to have you, as always.
Thank you, Simon.
To his right, we have Sarah Moat. Sarah is the co-founder and creative director of Moat, a Shopify expert and digital design studio based out of Venice, California.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Anshay Bhatia, the CEO and founder of Verbal Plus Visual, a digital agency that creates e-commerce solutions specifically for lifestyle brands that they support and love.
Thanks, Simon.
It's great to have you all up here on stage with me. I'd like to thank you for joining us. Now, a fun fact for everyone in the audience, all of our panelists here today are actually contributing authors to our latest edition of Grow Volume 3. This book is around how you can build a profitable web design business. If you haven't read the chapter yet, or if you haven't picked up a book here at the conference, I highly suggest you do. They're available for free, scattered across the venue, near the front, and also in the firehouse over at the side. So I definitely recommend you grab a coffee if you haven't yet. And in the book, all three of our panelists kind of discuss a lot of topics that are surrounding the concept of how they approach scoping in their agencies, dealing with client challenges, as well as pitching projects to clients. So with that being said, I'd love to start our discussion. And I think we're going to start off with a pretty general question. I think everyone here up on stage, myself included, and most of the people here in the audience, probably have scoped a Shopify project at least once, or probably do it on a regular basis. But everyone has a unique way in which they approach that process. So I'd love to hear from our panelists kind of how you do that in your own agencies and what that looks like. And I guess we can start with Ross, if that's cool.
Yeah, sure. So I'll get a little technical when it comes to scoping for us. We really have found, we do a lot of custom, almost exclusively custom Shopify Plus projects. So a lot of our merchants have a lot of custom requirements, of course. And we found that it's actually really helpful to break the projects up into 4 kind of distinct components to them. So the first is going to be design requirements. The second is functional requirements. The third is integration requirements. And the last is sort of data migration requirements. So design requirements are fairly straightforward, more or less what templates are we going to be building for their theme. The functional requirements kind of gets in a little deeper. So if there are specific things that they want to see happen within that theme, certain functionality, image zoom, alternative gallery sliders, things like that, just trying to call those out. Integration requirements typically is apps that we're going to be installing or third-party systems that we might install through a connector. And then the last thing, data and content migration. Because we're doing a lot of these Shopify Plus gigs, they tend to be people on an established platform, a WooCommerce or a Magento or such. And so we have to think about how we're going to be moving all that data, orders, customers, existing products, all that kind of stuff. So from a technical perspective, when we're thinking scope, our documents in pretty decent detail break down those 4 components so we can really speak to exactly what has to get executed during the project.
That's super interesting. So how about you, Sarah?
I think Ross said a lot of really great things there. Something I'd like to add is before we dive too far into scoping a project, it always really starts with just a conversation with that client. So you can get a sense of creatively if it'd be a good fit, if you can have a good dialogue with them, what your rapport would be like, as that gives a lot of insight to how the project would be once you start collaborating, once you're in the project after it's been scoped, after it's been paid, once you're working with them, what that relationship could be like. So we can really get excited about what the details are of it and start scoping and putting together project outlines, but we try to pay a lot of attention to what the relationship and the dynamic with every single potential new client that we speak to is, so we can get an understanding if it's a good fit, not just from skill and experience, but for personality levels and really what they're looking for.
That's great. One of the things that we do once we determine that a client is going to be somebody that we want to work with is we first identify them as plus versus not plus. So if they're not a plus client or not going to be on plus, we've been around for 8 years. We've done a lot of e-commerce projects. We have a good sense of what the scope will be based upon past data. And so we track our time always on every type of project that we work on. And what that allows us to do is really codify our sales process. And so for a non-plus client, we can say, all right, typically a non-plus client will be X amount of hours. And for us, that's typically around 400 hours. And so because we have that data, we can cross-reference that data with what the requirements are for this particular client. And so in that case, we can go flat rate or we can go time and materials. Now, if they're a plus client, we also can estimate based upon that past data of previous projects, but we always go time and materials because there's no way to tell at that point with so many integrations, so much design, so much user experience that needs to go into it. So we really give a big range from an estimate perspective and always make sure we do it time and materials so that we're safe on our end.
Right, so you all have kind of a little bit of a unique approach to how you do that. One thing I wanted to ask you, Ross, is you mentioned integrations. So a lot of Shopify stores often require some additional functionality that's only really provided through third-party applications that are either through the App Store or built privately. How do you go about kind of positioning that to a client when you're trying to add on an app to what they're trying to build?
So in terms of selling them on the use of an app or something like that?
Exactly, and the ongoing fees that are associated with that, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a conversation. I mean, when we approach a project, we like to spend a lot of time digging into the business requirements that they have and really kind of start agnostic to a particular platform or a particular feature in Shopify. So we'll come in and sort of say, okay, walk us through your business. An order comes in, what happens? Who's going to get notified? How are they notified? Are there particular rules that then have to take place? Are there other emails that are being sent? And really try and not get too wrapped up in prescribed solutions right off the bat, but instead just understand how their current business functions and how they have all their current workflow kind of configured. And then from there, you spend a little time talking about that, map it out, all that. After that, it's a lot easier then to look at it and sort of say, okay, well, your inventory management's really easy, but you've got a bunch of different warehouses, so we have to think about maybe a smarter way to manage your fulfillment. Or, hey, fulfillment's easy, but your return process is a mess. We should find something there. So for us, a lot of it starts not in what apps do you want to use, because I think that puts clients down the path of sort of the app bath, where they have a million apps and their site just falls apart because of it. Instead, we sort of say, what are the business requirements, and let us identify appropriate apps based on that.
Would both of you agree with that?
Yeah, we do the exact same thing. First and foremost, what are the problems you're having in your business? How do we solve those things? We don't even look at the apps until we've said, all right, these are the problems that you're having. And we always ask, in sales, we call it the 5 whys, right? We keep asking why. Why do you want this? If you need a new inventory management system, why? And you always want to ask why, and that gets to the root of the problem. And so that's what we do to make sure that we're solving that or figuring out what that potential solution could be, and then we go into the apps.
Okay, great. One of the things that I noticed that all of you kind of said that was in common is the importance of really having that conversation with the client first and getting a thorough understanding of their business. In many cases, we refer to that as like the discovery phase of the scoping process. We were kind of talking backstage a bit about how you approach that. And so some of you were saying you actually charge for the discovery part. Would you mind talking a bit about that?
Yeah, we've learned pretty hard that if you don't if you don't charge for the real in-depth analysis of their business and analysis of these apps and really thinking through all the requirements in their project, it's going to lead to a couple different issues. One, you're kind of giving away the value that you have as an experienced partner who knows what apps to go to, who knows what questions to ask. You're sort of giving that away for free that they could then take to someone else, which, again, that happens, it's fine. But to not get paid for that time, and often it is 20, 30, 40, 50 hours for us, it really hurts quite a bit. And two, I think it actually commits the client to taking the process a lot more seriously. So they come into it and they're like, okay, I put $5,000, $10,000, whatever, $20,000 down, and I want to make sure I'm getting the most out of this, and I want to make sure that my project itself is executed properly. So it kind of puts a little skin in the game for them and really commits them to the process, which is pretty helpful.
Yeah, 9 times out of 10, they're going to go with you at that point, right? So
100%.
it's a great in. We do the same on very large, again, Shopify Plus deals that are time and materials. If a client really doesn't know what the scope is going to be and we give them a range and they're not comfortable with that, that's when we recommend doing the paid strategy phase. So they're paying for it regardless. It's just the format that it's in, really, at the end of the day.
Right. And Ross, you also mentioned documentation. Like you really try to document the scoping process as you're going through it. And from my experience working in an agency, I found that not only does that help your internal team, and guide them through the project itself, but it also helps set expectations with the client. What sort of documentation do you guys always rely upon when you're diving into projects?
Like in the scoping phase?
Yeah, exactly.
I think the most important thing to keep in mind is even though e-commerce is our day-to-day and what we live and we breathe and we know it inside and out, that it's completely new and an enigma to the vast majority of people. So before even really scoping a project, just having a conversation and ensuring that you can walk the prospective client through your process, explain why you have a process, why it works, why you're confident about it, so that they can be really confident in teaming up with you as well. And you can get a really good sense of, if that process is going to be a good fit for them as well. And documenting that, we always walk someone through verbally. We have a really good conversation. We can touch on any questions. We send over a really detailed project outline before we start a project that has all the details of what we'll be working on, all the details to confirm a project, but also reiterates what our core process that we'll be following together is, from sign-on, the creative exploration phase, design phases, revisions, development, testing, launching, so that it's as clear as possible. And even elements that could be assumed, even if someone's built a website, many times from their business in the past, it's an industry that evolves so rapidly that it's always good to have those conversations so you can ensure that you are on the same page and just start off as strong as possible.
We do something similar, but we actually split out our documents. So we have a proposal that includes a general idea of your fees and the team, as well as a lot of information about us, case studies, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very in-depth document that is really all about VPV, our process, and we walk them through that document. And then we have a scope of work that serves as the basis for the contract. So we actually split it out on our side, and we found that works really well, especially when you start to deal with clients who are spending, $50K plus, $100K plus. They really want to get a sense of the trustworthiness of your firm, and this provides that for them.
Yeah, one thing too we've found that is really helpful when you're putting together a proposal or something like this. We do the same thing, project scope, that's sort of your technical breakdown, process, how do we approach this, schedule, all that kind of stuff. One thing that we've added that I think is worth considering is what we call project policies. So it's literally like, here are our rules to work with us. Yeah. One, you need a single point person on your side that we're going to communicate with who makes decisions, that we can hold accountable when you don't do your thing. Two, you have to pay for third-party apps, because sometimes people don't realize that. Yeah. Three, we're going to put a certain portion of the budget aside to specifically address support. So, we have different policies, but having some of those things that aren't necessarily specific to their project, aren't necessarily process, can be really helpful too, because it's, again, just setting the groundwork for a successful relationship. And that's how we define it. We're like, hey, this isn't insurance policies, it's just us saying, here's how we can have a really successful project together in terms of how we collaborate.
Totally, yeah. We have a FAQ section in our proposal, and it does exactly that, outlines all of those questions. But I'm going to take one of those, the project manager on the other side. That's a really good one.
Yeah.
And while it's great to have all of these processes in place to really map out the scope, and I'm sure everyone in the audience can resonate with this, projects change, right? And a lot of projects become victim to scope creep. And if you're not familiar with the term, scope creep refers to when there's an enhancement in technical requirements that weren't expected, or timelines or budgets deviate from the original plan. Sarah actually wrote a really great chapter in Grow Volume 3 that talked a lot about how to kind of proactively protect yourself from scope creep and kind of some of the things to watch out for. So would you mind diving into some of those tactics?
Yeah, absolutely. And scope creep is something that comes up a lot in our industry, so it's a good thing to think about. In my experience, it's usually viewed as being negative. I like to think of it as also being an opportunity, because when you are working with someone on a project and all of a sudden they're inspired and they start having new ideas, that's a really good thing. That could be a sign that you're really doing your job well. But it's all about how you manage those. And scope creep is something that you have to be really mindful and from day one very thoughtful about, because if you start saying yes, there's something about the danger of the word just. If you start saying yes to a few things, that opens the doors. So beforehand, I think there's a lot of preventative measures that you can take to prevent scope creep. Just properly taking the time to scope out a project and be really honest about the expectations, what the needs are, the requirements, what the goals are, so that you can put together a proposal that's going to be falling in line with what that client's going after. And during a project, if something comes up that would be extending the scope, just having a conversation about it. Most clients, they might have a request, and unless you have that conversation, they're not going to inherently know how difficult that is. It might be something that they think, oh, that's a really easy add-on, but actually takes a complete rebuild or a totally different direction. So there's a few different ways to go about taking care of that. I would be glad to make myself available if anyone has any specific questions. I don't want to give too specific of advice, because it's more about knowing what questions to ask for how to deal with that. But a few things to keep in mind is if you want to offer more for a project, if you're going to increase the scope, it's really important to scale back on deliverables and train a client that your relationship is built on respect and you're going to accommodate them however you can. But if they want to add to a project in some places, that does mean there's going to be concessions somewhere else, or it'll be an additional charge, which you can explain exactly how you got to that number and weigh it with them if it's worth adding onto the project. And many times it is. And that's a way that you can upsell a client during a project and then start a really good relationship where you continue to work with them for years to come.
Go ahead. The one thing I was going to say, we actually found it to be really helpful. We put 30 hours, we found, just kind of arbitrarily picked that number, it sounded pretty good. It's about $5,000 worth of work, so it sounds decent. So 30 hours of all of our projects are allocated to what we call a flex fund. And the idea for us is that it's available day one for all of our projects. And as we go through the project, if we do run into things that are out of scope, it gives us a way to just very easily address them where there's already sort of a negotiation that's occurred around, hey, you're going to ask for things that aren't included in the core budget, but we've got 30 hours, so if you want to do that, hey, no problem.
Yeah, we do something very similar. I know we were discussing.
Yeah.
I like the name of yours. But that's a very good idea as well.
Yeah.
The thing that we do is we just make sure, again, if there's any indecisiveness on the project, we build time and materials. So that right up front alleviates a lot of that scope creep talk, but you still have to have those conversations. And so it's really, our COO does a great job of talking about it early on. The second we think we might go over that range, we discuss that and we discuss why that is happening. And it could be for a myriad of reasons, but we always make sure that we talk about it early and often. On a flat rate project, what we do is we make sure that the scope is really detailed, of course, and then we have in big letters and we have discussions. If you are outside of the scope, it will be an extra charge, and they sign off on that, and it's very obvious that they will be charged extra. And so they know that at several points in the process before we even start the project. So that really helps a lot.
Yeah, and I think the client education component when you're onboarding a new client is super important in terms of protecting yourself from that kind of increased demands, because they will come, and I'm sure everyone in the audience feels that.
It still happens. It still happens. Even through all of that, it still happens.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember one of the first web projects that I ever managed, I was so eager to show my bosses that I made the client happy that I was so afraid to say no. So I kept saying yes to all the demands, kept letting things happen, and we went off timeline, the technical scope increased, and we went off budget. And obviously that was a learning lesson for me, but I think one of the hardest things a lot of people have is learning how to say no, and doing so in like a tactful way without kind of damaging the relationship. Do you guys have any kind of recommendations about how to go about those tough conversations?
Just do it early and be very honest and transparent about it. And if you do that, they will respect you. And if they respect you, then you'll have a good, productive conversation. But if you wait until later, they're going to get annoyed, understandably. Why are you throwing this on me late? So it's a very understandable response. So if you're honest up front and you're transparent, it always works out well. We've found when we do that.
Great.
Yeah, I think it's important to sometimes remind clients, maybe not in the exact words, but just speaking with them and saying, you both really want the project to be a success. They, of course, want it to be a success because if it is, it can mean tremendous growth for their business and really taking things to a new level. You want it to be a success because you're putting so much time and energy into it and you want to see that happen. I mean, being part of this, you firsthand experience growth with your clients, and I think when they know that you are equally dedicated to the success of the project, when you are transparent, when you have open lines of communication, and when you really explain if something is a yes or if something is a no, why, and you walk them through, and you can have it be a discussion rather than just, no, we can't do that. So we always try to say, yes, this is what it'll take. And if it is a hard no, it's usually something that there's other reasons. But I've found that through open lines of communication, you can have a really strong relationship. And even when things come up in a project that could be a bit tense, you can come out of it stronger on the other side.
Yeah, I've also found that having very clear iteration processes with them. So saying you only get 3 rounds of reviews, and that's how we're going to proceed with this project, can really help set expectations from the get-go, so that they know they can't be emailing you every week or every day when they want to change direction or add something. So I think that's a really great way to try to set those expectations up with the clients.
I think it's probably worth stressing, and this is something I tell my team literally every single week. Our business, everyone here, is very, very simple. It's set expectations, meet expectations. The only reason there's ever a problem is because one of those two things didn't happen. Either an expectation wasn't set, and therefore there was some sort of gray area, some sort of cloudy issue, and then it's well, you said or you didn't say, or well, I thought you were going to do it, and then you get in those situations. Or an expectation wasn't met. Hey, you said you were going to do it, you said it was going to cost this much, you said you were going to do it by this date. So literally any problem that you ever experience as an agency is related to one of those two. And I think for us, what we found is that as we run into these problems, just identifying them from that lens of did we not set the expectation or did we not meet it really allows us to reflect in a way that can help us moving forward. Because if it's not set, well, maybe you just didn't have a policy to set it. You didn't know to ask that question ahead of time, so now let's make sure that's part of our process. Or if you didn't meet it, well, then it might be a less comfortable conversation with a team member. But I think it's an important lesson that we've learned over the years that's probably worth kind of repeating a bit.
From your experience, have any of you really pick up on any red flags or warning signs when you're bringing on a new client that maybe they're going to be prone to increased requests or scope creep?
I'll answer this one as it's pretty directly related to my chapter in the Grow series. Yes, there's definitely can be warning signs, and it's something that oftentimes if you're in a project and you might notice some things, you'll realize earlier on you could have picked up on it. So I think, although it might not be what everyone would want to hear, taking a proactive approach and really trying to pay attention to warning signs in the early stages before you even sign them on as a client. Because if it's a warning sign during the project, it will be more difficult to address. Again, it comes back to respect. A lot of what we're saying comes back to respect. Teaming up with clients that have a lot of respect for your expertise and what you're bringing to the table and what you can bring them in terms of growth for their business, but also partnering with people that you genuinely respect and you want to do right by. And when you're initially scoping projects, there can be warning signs. If there are, it doesn't mean you have to go running to the hills. I know it's very difficult sometimes when you put a lot of time and energy into something to walk away from a project. And so warning signs can be seen as a red flag or as an opportunity. I can give a couple examples. If you're speaking to a potential new client and they start completely bashing another studio, it's usually not a good sign. It's definitely something that, like, a siren goes off in my own mind. But then before I jump to conclusions, I ask, well, what happened? Can you give me a bit of insight to the relationship? Because how can you guarantee that you can do any better unless you know where that relationship went wrong? And sometimes you'll find out that the client did not have the right expectations, or they did not hire the right team. Maybe they really needed a designer, they were doing a rebrand, and they hired someone whose focus is building apps. That definitely happens, partnering with someone who might not be ideal. Maybe, they didn't feel the communication was fast enough, but ask them why. If they say the communication wasn't fast enough, they took an hour to respond to every email, you need to know what you're signing on to and if that's gonna be something you can do better. Another thing is if someone shakes hands with you over the phone or in person on something saying, I agree to the costs of this, I want to do the project, let's move forward, and then they backstep and they try to change the cost or change the payment terms. That definitely can be a red flag. Or it could be that the person that made that agreement had to consult their team and was not the person that really could be shaking hands on that project. So at that time, it's a good moment to reassess if there's other people on that team you should really be bringing on early on and speaking to. And if it is that they just did not have the budget for it and they still want to move forward with the project, finding a way together to make that happen. Scale back on deliverables, adjust the proposal. If it's a good fit creatively, if it's a good fit, personality-wise, go forward with it. But whenever there is a warning sign, I think listen to your gut feeling. If you have an intuitive sense that someone might be difficult to work with, we also all have off days, so maybe have a follow-up call another day and definitely address all of those. And if you do, and if it's a good fit and you move forward, what I found is that every single project that's really built on mutual respect and that you have really open lines of communication, it means that when you're in the creative process, you'll be able to have a solid foundation that you can really push the limits and really innovate and bring challenging ideas and concepts to the client that might be beyond what they were even expecting. But if they trust you and if it's a good relationship from day one, you're going to be able to deliver your best work.
The thing I'll add to that is the client is going to be the client. So before you actually sign off on a project, the client is going to do certain things that they're going to also do after you sign off. So if they're slow to communicate, they're probably going to be slow to communicate after. So know yourself and know what you can handle and what you can't handle. And again, trust your gut. I can't agree with that more. Those types of things are warning signs or are positive signs to what your relationship is going to be. So take those into heavy account early on because it will continue throughout the process.
Right. And so we touched on a lot about the client and the technical requirements of the project scope itself, but I think another really key component to consider is how you allocate your team resources during the scoping process, but also post-scope and during the project itself. And I know you all have kind of varying sizes of teams. How do you go about allocating your developers, your designers, your project managers when you're approaching a new project?
Yeah, I think this is a somewhat more recent change for us, but we've really taken to trying to standardize absolutely everything we do. Not only have we built our own theme framework and our own, data migration tools and all that kind of stuff, but we've actually started looking at our documentation and rather than it just being, just general reflections on, oh yeah, we kind of have this process thing, we actually have been writing our own instructions for how to do everything. So it's sort of our internal, here's how you install this app specifically. Here's how to, configure Google Tag Manager. Here's how to do this very specific thing. And the person who really knows that, a lead developer, whatever, lead designer, they'll be the ones who would write those pieces of instruction first. But then the idea is to write it in a way that any other team member could hypothetically kind of take that task and then run with it, and they could kind of fulfill it. And I think this idea of really just standardizing every aspect of what you do is sort of a huge way, for us at least, to help with that.
Anything to add?
Yeah, so same thing. We standardize everything as much as possible. We're building our own pattern library and things like that internally. And then again, going back to what I talked about earlier, we look at past data. So when we're allocating our team, we'll look and say, hey, so-and-so project took 200 developer hours or 400 developer hours and 200 design hours and 100 UX hours, whatever the case is. And again, we can codify that. And then what we want to do using processes is get faster and faster and faster. And that's what processes allow you to do. So that's why we continuously harp on data and processes.
Great. And I think it's also super important to have those key stakeholders, like your lead developers who are actually going to be working on the project, directly in those initial conversations with the client so they can truly speak to what technical requirements can we meet, what are we going to have to build more of a custom fix for of a private app. And I think it's really important to bring them to the front of the table. Now, with that being said, I think it's a great time to jump into live Q&A. I see a bunch of questions coming in. If you haven't submitted a question yet, you can do it through the mobile app, like I said, and you can use the code YYZ to do so. I have them here beside me, so we'll go into these now. So this one is asked anonymously, but someone asks, how should an agency request a high-level budget to a client without sounding money-hungry? And I would even follow that up with how do you defend those prices when the client maybe isn't willing to pay what you're kind of scoping it at?
So you're saying, can you repeat it, sorry?
Yeah, definitely. So when you are pitching a client on a particular, maybe a higher budget or price for a project, how do you really convey the value of that price and defend that price?
Sure. So what we do is we actually, in our scope of work, have a page that talks about return on investment. So we heavily look at their analytics and we say, hey, you're here on your conversion rate, right? But if you're at the industry standard, this is where you'll actually be, and this is how much money you'll make. And we talk a lot about how we use user testing every step of the way. We're not designing something on our whims, right? We're taking data, again, I'm going back to data, we're taking data from your analytics, from user tests, from A/B tests, and we're using that every step of the process to prove out the results to get you to that 1% conversion rate from 0.5 or whatever the case is, right? And if they're doing $1 million in business, well, they doubled their amount, their revenue, right? And so we look at that and say, hey, we want to get you to the industry average, or we want to improve you X percentage. And again, based upon our past data from past clients, this is what you can expect, right? Is it going to be 100% accurate to that? No, but will it be an improvement? Yes, for sure. And so you can start to prove out a return on investment, and that side alone has proven to be very valuable for us in our sales process, because they can actually see what are the various things that we're going to do to improve their business. And at the end of the day, we can design the most beautiful thing in the world, but if it's not selling product for them, it doesn't matter. And so we always want to prove that out.
Yeah, I think one thing, when it comes to talking about budgets, it's helpful to kind of direct the conversation to other clients, right? So for us, sometimes it'll be, well, Mr. Client or Miss Client, the last company that we worked with that looked like you, that was in your industry, that had roughly the same amount of requirements, here was their budget, and that allowed us to accomplish X, Y, Z. And I think when you do that, it allows you to kind of set expectations without directly saying, well, you need to pay $50,000 or whatever it is. I think it's a way to kind of introduce it without kind of directly confronting them about it to a certain degree.
Yeah, it's case studies, right? You have to show great case studies that are going to be relevant for them and at their price point. Yeah. And if you can prove that, you're good to go.
If they have confidence in your work and that by making that investment they're going to have a significant return on it, then they're the ones that are really going to be benefiting. It's not just about how much they're paying for a feature or an app or a theme or an add-on. It's really what that potential is going to be for their business to grow. So I think it's about also having a conversation about what the goals for investing are. What are we looking to achieve? And if you have done something similar for other clients, what the return for them was is something that just gives someone confidence, because everyone is careful with how they allocate their budget. Even if they have a really good budget for a website, they want to get the most out of it. They want to have the most successful website they can. And since we are the ones that are experts on this, just having that conversation about what they can expect and what the benefit is going to be, and explaining, I think, why it is the price that it is. If it's something really specialized that is built custom for them, engineering is difficult. Design takes time. And sometimes it's good to just have a conversation and remind people of that.
And you've got to prove that you're going to increase their revenue, decrease their costs, decrease their risk, and do all of these things effectively. And if you do that, again, it goes back to ROI. You're showing the ROI, they're going to be much more inclined to work with you.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's really at the heart of value-added pricing, right? Like, you're not just creating these widgets for merchants, you're not just delivering a deliverable, a website, or an app. You're really trying to improve their business, and you're almost acting as a strategic advisor. I know, Ross and I have talked about this before, the importance of really cementing yourself as that advisor for your clients and really affecting their bottom line. So I'll move on to the next question. So Kellis has asked, how do you go about tracking hours between a team that may be working on multiple projects at the same time? And so we were kind of talking about some of the strategies and tools that you guys use when we were backstage. So what would you have to advice you would give to Kellis?
Cracking the whip, quoting him.
Exactly. We actually have a whip. No, I'm just kidding. We basically are on it. Our COO, again, she's on it every day, at least every week for sure. Every Monday, have you submitted your hours? So it's really just being diligent. And some people are better than others at the end of the day. So knowing who is good at submitting their hours and knowing who is not good at submitting their hours and reacting accordingly. So that's what we do. It's really just diligence at the end of the day.
I think part of it too is trying to explain to the team why is that valuable. If it feels like another responsibility, well, some people might do it, some people might not, some people might think it sucks. In some ways it does. But if you can explain, listen, the more accurate that we can be with the hours that we track, the easier it'll be for us to be profitable, because we'll be able to price accordingly. And as we're profitable, that means you can get raises. So trying to lure them through sort of the incentive, the personal incentive they could gain from being consistent, I think is a nice way to...
That's a great point, and also not being on them if they didn't submit 40 hours for the week. I think a lot of times employees get scared that, hey, I didn't submit 40 hours. It's not about that. You could submit 30 or 25, or you could submit 50, but it really is more important to get the accurate count so that we can estimate properly.
Right, and I think the importance of time tracking, it goes back to what you were both saying about having that data warehouse to rely upon for the next project. So we can be more efficient in these areas. These are the areas that we're doing great at. How can we optimize? So it's really important. I'll admit, when I worked at an agency, I was one of the worst people at tracking my own time.
Slacker.
And so you probably would have hated working with me. But it's really good to hear that you have these processes in place. So I'm going to move on to the next one here. So we talked a lot about working with clients and understanding their expectations and kind of what they want out of their website. Jesse here asks, what do you do when you're trying to work with a new client who isn't really sure about what they actually need? Because often, what they want might not actually reflect what they need in their solution. How do you go about those conversations?
We just ask why. Going back to the 5 whys, we always ask why. Why do you need more revenue? Why? Some clients don't need more revenue. They actually need to decrease their costs, right? And that will, in turn, make them more profit, right? So always asking why and continuously doing that. That's what we do, and that has proven to be very useful.
What I found is our specialty is really designing and building custom themes, and the build of those themes can vary dramatically. It can be really extensive or something a bit more, getting the essentials. And if we have a client that is not quite sure what they are wanting, we often, if it's a really good fit, if we are starting off on the same foot, there's an exploration that you go through together. And so oftentimes we'll set an initial budget and we'll just tell them, let us show you how far we can really get with this. Because there's a lot of really advanced features and amazing opportunities in even our starting custom builds that they may not be aware of. And once we're deeper in the creative exploration and laying out designs and walking through them, sharing about the inspiration, the strategy of them, a lot of those questions start to come together. So if they're not quite sure what they want, it's all about asking why, but are they not quite sure what they want functionality-wise or design-wise? And it's also about asking, what is the motivation for the project? Is it a brand new...
What are their goals?
Exactly. Is it a brand new launch? Is it a business that, started with a basic Shopify theme out of the box and now their sales are booming and they're ready for something more custom? Is it a business that they were doing well for a while and now they're failing and this is like a last effort to resurrect it? If you can get an idea of the motivation, and if it is a really good fit to work on, then maybe just breaking it down and starting with really focusing on getting the essentials right and showing them exactly how far they can get with that, and reserving some of that additional budget so that you can revisit it once you already have something in place, a visual to reference together that they're really happy with, and seeing if they do want to add on more and having the conversations when there's a bit more context to them.
Right. So Rob is asking about retainers. So, one of the really good things that you can do as you're an agency owner or project manager is to try to keep a client working with you after you've already brought them on board. Because you could launch a shop, but if that's the last touch point you have with the client, you're missing a lot of potential ongoing revenue that you can earn from them. So that's where retainers come into play. And I know you briefly mentioned the Flex Fund, but I'd like to hear a little more detail about that and hear from both Sarah and Anshay about how you approach retainers and ongoing client support and design work.
Yeah, I mean, we try to make the Flex Fund idea as simple as possible. And again, we require it up front. So technically, during that initial phase of the project, that Flex Fund could be tapped into. So by the end of it, depending on how scope creep the client can get, we might not have any hours left, in which case we'd have them re-up. But most cases, they might dip into a few hours, but honestly, most cases, they don't touch it at all. And that gives us a nice base to work with when it comes to doing support, after we launch phase 2s, or just subsequent work of any sort. So I think for us, just getting that mindset of, hey, things are going to be out of scope, let's just have that budget available, or if it's not used, we'll have it going forward, is great. We personally haven't had a lot of success in doing monthly retainers, only because we don't do marketing, we don't do any of that. We're very much a design and dev shop. And we know that 1 month there might be a lot of initiatives, and the next month there might not be any. So having more of a pre-allocated budget for it is a little easier from our side.
We follow something very similar. Back in the day we offered retainers, but we found that clients would try to, piece out the way that they sent over requests so that they'd meet their minimum every month, and that's not really the way the business happens. Sometimes there's a lot more things that you want to address 1 month, and then you're smooth sailing for a few months. So we do something very similar to your Flex Fund, where it's a prepaid block of hours that we can be available for support, for design, for engineering. And what we also do is give an overview of what we could work together as on phase 2 after the site is launched. After a site launches, there's an amazing amount of analytics and data that you can start taking a look at and see how the design is being received, see how the customers are interacting with the new storefront, and then start working on optimizing their conversion, start getting them set up with the right ad placement for them, and making sure they're getting the most out of SEO. So we map out exactly what we could help out with. And if we have a great client, we want to let them know that we're there for the long run. We want to partner with them and be key in their growth. And so we give an overview of what we could really work on, and then set up something very similar to what you do, so that we can tailor it to that client. And some have many more monthly needs, others have a bit fewer, but that we can be there for them.
Cool. And we do more optimization packages versus maintenance packages. So we'll do A/B testing, user testing every month. We'll require a minimum of 3 months and always a minimum of 40 hours a month. If it's under that, it's not really worth it for us, and so we'll refer them to somebody else. But if they do sign on, and let's say they're at 40 hours or 60 hours or 80 hours, they have a flex of 20 hours. They can't go under 40, but if they're at 60, they can go down to 40 or up to 80 in any given month. And that allows us to be flexible while not, let's say they have a big new feature that they want to add in a certain month. We're not getting destroyed 1 month because we're getting all these unexpected hours, and we're not able to fulfill all the other clients that we have. And so we try to keep that in balance with all of our other clients.
Right. So what I'm hearing is that services like marketing and conversion rate optimization are really prime for those monthly, longer-term retainers, and kind of like support, maintenance, additional requests are better for kind of those fixed hour rates that you provide. And I think what's nice about that latter option too is it really helps safeguard you from the scope creep potential that we were talking about earlier, that you have the hours that the merchants could use if they need to. So we're running a little low on time, and I think we have enough time for just one more question, and I think I found the perfect one to end the first day of Unite. So this one is asked anonymously again, but it's great to be at Unite 2017 as a new partner. What is the single advice of do's and don'ts that you would recommend to a brand new partner in the ecosystem?
Go for it.
The single advice of just in general?
Yeah, for a new partner.
I don't know. I'm going to take a minute. Go ahead.
Take a minute. I would say when I first started GrowSpark years ago, this was actually before we even got into Shopify, one of the things that we really found as a huge channel of growth for us was working with other agencies and other partners. And I think, especially if you're a freelancer, I could not stress enough how much opportunity there is to work with other agencies who, they're 5, they're 10, they're 20, they're 30 people, and they need extra hands. The marketplace right now, the demand for Shopify is insane, and I can almost guarantee you any agency that has had even a little semblance of growth is probably desperate for talented people. And you don't necessarily have to work in a fashion where you become an employee. If you like the independence of being a freelancer, or if you want to build your own agency, look at those kind of collaborations and partnerships as an opportunity to launch off of, a launching pad for your business. So I'd really, really kind of encourage you to, take advantage of the time here at Unite and mingle and find out if there are opportunities to collaborate. We're always looking for help, so talk to me if you'd like, but there are plenty of people here that could really benefit from talented individuals.
I'll be a bit more insightful. I absolutely should go for it, but I definitely think it's important to know that as a freelancer, as a new partner, there's an amazing community, and it's not just once a year at Unite, it's all the time. And technology is a really inspiring industry in and of itself, because people are so open to share. When someone, codes something they're really proud of, it's public, they share it, there's this discussion about it. If you run into, if you're building a theme for the first time and you have a question, there's the community boards, there's the Grow series, there's the Shopify blog, which is fantastic. And I found that in the design world and in the technology world, that the people that are really the key players are really happy to share their experience and to coach and to guide. And because of that, there's incredible books. And if you're starting off and you're learning programming, there's phenomenal online resources for learning. So there's no reason that you cannot take things at your own pace. You can go full speed. You can achieve really what you'd like to do. And you'll meet at Unite a lot of people that got their start as a part-time programmer and then became an expert, or came from a completely different walk of life, or maybe studied computer software, and have been in this world from day one. And it just shows that if you're determined and if you really have a dream, you can go for it. And there's a lot of people that want to see you succeed.
And I would just say find a mentor. Find somebody who's done what you want to do, and ask them if they could teach you what are the things that they went through. And that really helps a lot. I didn't have a mentor early on, but I found some as I progressed, and they helped so much. So figure out what you're passionate about as well. That's the other thing. Make sure you're extremely passionate about it and go for it and do it.
Those are really great pieces of advice. And while I'm not a Shopify partner, one of the things that I would recommend is definitely take advantage of all the resources that Shopify does provide. Sarah mentioned a few of them, like the Grow series and the blog, but the partner managers and everybody here at Unite from Shopify is always happy to talk to you about any of the challenges you're facing, any of the limitations that you're experiencing, and really work together to help you build a better business for yourselves as well. With that, though, I think unfortunately we have to end the panel. We kind of ran out of time. But if any of you do have any questions that you asked that didn't get covered, or you just want to talk a little bit more, I'm definitely open to talking with you tonight at the after party and here at Unite, and I'm sure our panelists would be more than happy to discuss as well. I just want to thank all 3 of you for coming out today. It's been really insightful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And for everybody out in the audience, I hope you had a wonderful first day of the conference, and I'm excited to see you all tonight at the after party, which is at the San Francisco City Hall. So have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.